work on the basis that if we get something right for the environment, it's usually right for the economy and public welfare as well.
Hello and welcome to the LifeWatch Eric podcast, A Window on Science. Now, in this third season, we're trying to extend our interviews a little outside of the eScience infrastructure itself, while still focusing on biodiversity and ecosystem research. But we're wanting to talk with individuals and organizations who contribute to open science and the study of invasive alien species. And I'm pleased to say my guest today is Mike Elliott. Mike is Professor of Estuarine and Coastal Sciences at the University of Hull in the UK and Director of the International Estuarine and Coastal Specialists Limited, which I think is a sort of consulting arm. He's a marine biologist, and his teaching, research, advisory, and consultancy includes estuarine and marine ecology, policy, governance, and management. He joins us today to talk about the intriguing concept of ocean optimism, which I love as a title. To all our listeners, wherever you may be, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Julian Kenny. It's great to have your company. Good morning, Mike. You're a busy man.
Good morning, Julian. It's great to be with you, and really nice to talk to you and all the listeners. Yes, these things keep me busy, but better that than sitting there with my feet up, I think.
Yeah, we'll see if you change your mind on that one. Anyway, straight into these questions. Mike, forgive my ignorance. How many oceans are there, and why are they important?
Thanks, Julian. As you mentioned at the start, we're talking about ocean optimism, and your listeners may be interested to know about a paper I've recently done with Ángel Borja in Spain on ocean optimism, where we go into these. The purists would say there is 4 or even maybe 5 oceans. And your listeners may be familiar with them: the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, the Arctic, and also the Antarctic. But actually, the key feature here is that they're all interconnected, and we talk about a world ocean conveyor belt, and this links all the oceans, and more importantly, it links the oceans to the climate and of course the land. So anything we do on land and the atmosphere affects the oceans, and vice versa. They're important because of that link. And your listeners will realize that there is many things that we do in the oceans. You know, we want food, we have navigation, we want recreation, many things. They give us employment. And they're important because of all those things. So the big idea in looking after those oceans is to say two things. How do we look after the natural system there and also deliver what humans want? To put this in a nutshell, we talk about a triple whammy. You know, 3 things that are hitting the oceans. One is an increased industrialization and urbanization, an increased use of resources such as food and space and so on, and water, and a decreased resistance and resilience to larger threats such as climate change. And all of these threats, all of these problems, not only were they documented in the recent book that came out, the Second World Ocean Assessment, which your listeners can download. It is free from the UN. And also this led to the UN Decade of Ocean Science from 2021 to 2030, which accompanies another UN decade, which is ecosystem restoration. And all of these aim to firstly stop the decline in ocean health, and then reverse it and give us better oceans for the future.
So you're saying that the ocean is in bad shape with 3 triple whammies. Why are we talking about optimism?
We've been talking about the state of the oceans and indeed the state of the environmental decline for probably 6 decades now. We've been describing how bad things are getting, how many uses we've had of the ocean, and indeed abuses of them. But we're now understanding the system much more. And therefore, if we understand it, then it gives us a chance to help manage it and improve it. And indeed, as you mentioned at the beginning, this is one of the raison d'etre of LifeWatch ERIC, because it's trying to help us to understand the oceans, the coast and the oceans, and therefore to manage them. So why I think there's many initiatives now trying to suggest there are many things we can do about this. This then gives us this idea of ocean optimism. And the optimism stems from the fact that we are now encouraging collaboration at national, regional, international levels, all the way up to UN. And this is really what many of us are working to. I suppose in a nutshell, it's having good science and understanding leading to good management. And really the idea of saying, we've got the tools at our disposal, we've got the ideas, we've got the concepts, now we should be putting them into place. But I think that's why we're saying we are optimistic that we can try and turn these things around. As has been said many times, the problem is people and the solution is people. So if we try and get many of these ideas into place, then hopefully we can be more optimistic about the future. But it requires us to do the work.
Yes. Okay. And take a positive stance on it.
Yep.
So I understand that you describe 4 priority topics for positive action.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through those quickly, please?
Yeah. Some of these are, let's say some of these are local problems, like we want sustainable food from the oceans. We want fish and shellfish, for example. And here we talk about blue foods and we talk about the blue economy, and there's any number of blue things to try and get the message over to people. And within these, if we have got good management, we should try and get that sustainable food. Now, that's not only wild catching of food, but it's also aquaculture as well. So that's one of the things. The second priority topic is restoring what we've damaged over the years. And I mentioned there was a UN decade of ecosystem restoration. So restoring our estuaries and coasts that we've damaged in the past. The third one is the stuff we put into the sea. So fishing is where we take things out of it. But the third of these is where we put stuff into the sea, which we might call contamination. And if the contamination harms the natural system, we get it's what we call pollution. And I guess the most notable source of this at the moment is marine litter. The fact that marine litter is coming from, well, we used to think most of it came from about 100 rivers worldwide, but actually it's probably nearer 1,000 rivers. But all that waste where people throw it into the nearest piece of water and hope it goes away, the idea of out of sight, out of mind. And then the fourth aspect is the oceans, the links with climate change. And mitigation of climate change. And what we're thinking about now is what I might call eco-engineering and geoengineering. That is managing the seas and using the seas to try and manipulate the ocean, the climate. So some of your listeners will have heard things like, putting iron filings in the sea to
Yes.
increase productivity, or increasing algae, or whatever, increasing algal biomass, or even pumping carbon dioxide, causing climate change, pumping the carbon dioxide to deep rocks or deep levels. So those four things, some are local problems, fishing, restoration, some are global, litter and climate change and so on.
But it all comes down to people. So I'd like to ask you, which people do we really need to influence most? And if we just take, for example, the contamination, the marine litter issue, who do we need to be talking to?
Yeah, it's interesting, Julian. We're talking about the seas, we're talking about the oceans, and LifeWatch Eric is looking outwards to the seas and the coasts and so on. But we have to remember that litter it's a land problem. Most of it is land origin. Now I know we've got some litter from fishing, and this leads to things like ghost fishing and tangling sort of turtles and so on, and sharks. But most of it is coming from the land. And if you think about it, most of it's a behavioral problem. It's trying to overcome this habit that we all have of throwing our litter into the nearest bit of water because we know it gets taken away somewhere. The only problem is it doesn't get taken away. We end up with these massive gyres, these accumulations of litter in the oceans. And I think there's a gyre in each of the major oceans I mentioned earlier, at least one gyre there. So we need to reach the man and woman in the street, as we would say in the UK, the man and woman on the Clapham omnibus. The local people, because they're the ones that are going to hopefully change their behaviour. And dare I say it, a few of us now. I shan't make guesses about your age, Julian, but having met you, I know you're not exactly like me. Neither am I a spring chicken, and we may have to sort of focus on getting the message to younger kids and younger children and so on. My grandchildren are very well aware of litter and environmental problems. But let's to be more serious. We need two aspects. We need what we talk about as a bottom up approach, things coming from people. And again, this is why LifeWatch Eric is trying to reach those wider groups, and then a top down approach. Coming from the UN and our governments and so on. But that behavioral change needs us to have a whole cycle approach. We have to think about not only how do we stop litter and rubbish and garbage going into the sea, but how do we stop producing it altogether? Now, we need plastics. Plastics are very valuable for many things, but we have to get to the having a cycle where we don't throw them away, where we recycle them, where we reuse them and so on, where we have a system, and it may be fueled by an economic approach or a technology approach or a policy and governance approach to trying to control this problem. And let's work on the basis that if we get something right for the environment, it's usually right for the economy and public welfare as well. If we have a clean environment, then we will get the fish and shellfish that we can eat and so on. So we need systems of managing the problem. Now, we talk a lot about monitoring the area and monitoring how much litter there is. Well, monitoring is not a management response. Monitoring is the way of working out, did your management work? sort of thing.
Yeah,
Did
or
did
what
it
to
do
do.
anything?
Yeah.
That's right. Yes. Did your management in the past work, and will your management in the future work? So trying to reach those groups is quite important.
Okay. And so, in this sort of context, trying to get through to those groups, is this where we want to change the narrative?
I'm not sure we want to change it. I think we have to keep saying that, we have to keep telling people what the solutions are. We have to keep telling people that there are ways of solving these problems that I was talking about. That there are ways of reducing our carbon footprint. I mean, your listeners saw this in the pandemic. All of a sudden, overnight, we were reducing our carbon footprints, and we could detect that. So the narrative is there, but it's actually showing people that the narrative works. If we do reduce the amount we fly, the amount of fuel we use, and things like that, then it does have an effect, and we can reduce the amount of carbon and so on. We can change our fishing pressures, our fishing measures. We can change to aquaculture and so on. We can do all those. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, "You don't say 20 different things. You say one thing 20 times,
20 times.
and it might just go in." And mind you, he was talking about politicians who are perhaps, not the best example. Yeah.
Principles of public relations. Yes, it's true.
Yeah. So getting over that thing now, going back to what we started talking about of these global initiatives. These past 2 years have been talked about as the super year for the oceans.
Yes.
Because there's been so many initiatives, not only the Sustainable Development Goals, the World Oceans Assessment, the UN Decades, but also the G7 Futures of the Oceans, and UNEP Global Environmental Monitoring, and so on. So there's lots of these things happening, which is why we're saying there is cause for optimism if we get all of these things right. Just a very, very brief point, though, is that many of these initiatives are encouraging people to do something. But the actions come down to people, and actually, dare I say it, the funding, it has to come down to local people, local a country, and so on. At the moment, we spend relatively small amounts on the oceans compared to space research. We spend minor amounts on it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, there's people, this is not somebody else's problem. This is something we can all contribute to. Mike, we're covering a lot of ground here. And usually at this point, I try to attempt a bit of a summary. But I suspect you're in a better position to summarize for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. Although you have been involved in these discussions for many years as well. I think there are a set of lessons in this. One is having good science on which policy is based, but also having policy based on the science.
Yes.
Ensuring that scientists, we're part of society as well, and we play a role in decision making. We have a role in decision making, and that's why we can push this, the optimism side, looking for solutions that cover all the aspects, not just the natural sciences, the ecology, and so on, but also the social sciences. As Bill Clinton mentioned, when asked, well, what's the most important topic? And it's the economy. I used to talk to politicians about a healthy ecology. Now I don't. I talk to them about a good economy and a sustainable economy and human welfare, and then say, and by the way, if we can do that and get good ecology, then fine. the thing I mentioned just now, a top-down approach. So we need direction from the top, the UN and our governments, but also we need the input from bottom up. We need people and so on to lead us through this. And we have to be careful that we don't just talk. We have to do the walk, as it was. And you'll have seen this so many times. We've had so many declarations. We've had so many global meetings, linking, Lisbon, which was last week, the UN Oceans, COP26 last year, COP27 this year. And we have to make sure that is actually put into action. There was a saying in English that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes.
And we've got those. We now just have to put those into action, which again, and I mentioned a couple of times, is why I think many of us are heartened with initiatives like LifeWatch, Eric, where it's trying to reach that wider people, the wider group. It's trying to make sure that the evidence and the information is suitable to get out, and it needs the platforms that LifeWatch, Eric, is developing in order to get that information out. Because of course, yes, we could take decisions without the information and data, but actually, if we've got the information and data in the right form, in the right place, hopefully it makes the decisions better anyway.
Fantastic. So, I mean, my summary, there is room to hope. And my hope is that this medium, this podcast, will, get around, that people will listen to your words of wisdom, and we can all play a larger part in that bottom-up effort to meet with the top-down effort of, say, the United Nations, and we're all in this together. Mike, thank you. It's these are the times we live in. Very interesting.
Exactly, Julian. I think yes, we are creating the problems, but we always have. What I hope is that people they're not told so often that Armageddon is coming, and it doesn't come, and then they get disillusioned and say, "Oh, what do you experts know about these
crying
sorts
wolf?"
of things?"
Yeah,
that's it exactly. So what I hope is, I think we are getting the messages over. There are some people that are not necessarily listening, I think, but is it that they're hearing and not listening, or something like that?
They just ducked out for a coffee.
There's always... Yeah, that's good. Anyway, I hope that's very interesting.
Thanks you very much for your time and your expertise, and a big thank you also to our listeners. Please get in touch. Please follow up. Visit our website, www.lifewatch.eu. Be sure to let your friends and work colleagues know about our cloud-based data and computing facilities at LifeWatch Eric, and how we can all positively contribute to finding solutions to these environmental dangers that we all face. So thank you all around. Thank you to my producer, Fabrizio, without whom none of this would work. I look forward to enjoying your company in future podcasts in A Window on Science.